One of these latter read, Pacific and Southwestern Railroad, Freight and Passenger Office, while another, much smaller, beneath the windows of the second story, bore the inscription, P&S.W. Land Office. Annixter hitched his horse to the iron post in front of this building and tramped up to the second floor, letting himself into an office where a couple of clerks and bookkeepers sat at work behind a high wire screen. One of these latter recognized him and came forward. "Hello," said Annixter abruptly, scowling the while. "Is your boss in? Is Ruggles in?" The bookkeeper led Annixter to the private office in an adjoining room, ushering him through a door on the frosted glass of which was painted the name Cyrus Blakely Ruggles. Inside, a man in a frock coat, shoestring necktie, and Stetson hat sat writing at a roller-top desk. Over this desk was a vast map of the railroad holdings in the country about Bonneville and Guadalajara, the alternate sections belonging to the corporation accurately plotted. Ruggles was cordial in his welcome of Annixter. He had a way of fiddling with his pencil continually while he talked, scribbling vague lines and fragments of words and names on stray bits of paper, and no sooner had Annixter sat down than he had begun to write, in full-bellied script, Anne, all over his blotting pad. "I want to see about those lands of mine. I mean of yours, of the railroads," Annixter commenced at once. "I want to know when I can buy. I'm sick of fooling along like this." "Well, Mr. Annixter," observed Ruggles, writing a great L before the N and finishing it off with a flourishing D. "The lands," he crossed out one of the N's and noted the effect with a hasty glance, "the lands are practically yours. You have an option on them indefinitely, and as it is, you don't have to pay the taxes." "Rot your option. I want to own them," Annixter declared. "What have you people got to gain by putting off selling them to us? Here this thing has dragged along for over 8 years. When I came in on Quien-Sabe, the understanding was that the lands, your alternate sections, were to be conveyed to me within a few months." "The land had not been patented to us then," answered Ruggles. "Well, it has been now, I guess," retorted Annixter. "I'm sure I couldn't tell you, Mr. Annixter." Annixter crossed his legs weariedly. "Oh, what's the good of lying, Ruggles? You know better than to talk that way to me." Ruggles' face flushed on the instant, but he checked his answer and laughed instead. "Oh, if you know so much about it," he observed. "Well, when are you going to sell to me?" "I'm only acting for the general office, Mr. Annixter," returned Ruggles. "Whenever the directors are ready to take that matter up, I'll be only too glad to put it through for you." "As if you didn't know. Look here, you're not talking to old Broderson." "Wake up, Ruggles. What's all this talk in Genslinger's rag about the grading of the value of our lands this winter and an advance in the price?" Ruggles spread out his hands with a deprecatory gesture. "I don't own the Mercury," he said. "Well, your company does." "If it does, I don't know anything about it." "Oh, rot. As if you and Genslinger and S. Behrman didn't run the whole show down here. Come on, let's have it, Ruggles. What does S. Behrman pay Genslinger for inserting that 3-inch ad of the P&S.W. in his paper? 10,000 a year, hey?" "Oh, why not 100,000 and be done with it?" returned the other, willing to take it as a joke. Instead of replying, Annixter drew his checkbook from his inside pocket. "Let me take that fountain pen of yours," he said. Holding the book on his knee, he wrote out a check, tore it carefully from the stub, and laid it on the desk in front of Ruggles. "What's this?" asked Ruggles. 3/4 payment for the sections of railroad land included in my ranch, based on a valuation of $2.50 per acre. You can have the balance in 60-day notes." Ruggles shook his head, drawing hastily back from the check as though it carried contamination. "I can't touch it," he declared. "I've no authority to sell to you yet." "I don't understand you people," exclaimed Annixter. "I offered to buy of you the same way 4 years ago, and you sang the same song. Why, it isn't business. You lost the interest on your money, 7% of that capital for 4 years. You can figure it out. It's big money." "Well, then, I don't see why you're so keen on parting with it. You can get 7%, the same as us." "I want to own my own land," returned Annixter. "I want to feel that every lump of dirt inside my fence is my personal property." Why, the very house I live in now, the ranch house, stands on railroad ground. But you've an option. I tell you I don't want your cursed option. I want ownership. And it's the same with Magnus Derrick and old Broderson and Osterman and all the ranchers of the county. We want to own our land, want to feel we can do as we blame please with it. Suppose I should want to sell Quien-Sabe. I can't sell it as a whole till I've bought of you. I can't give anybody a clear title. The land has doubled in value 10 times over again since I came in on it and improved it. It's worth easily 20 an acre now, but I can't take advantage of that rise in value so long as you won't sell, so long as I don't own it. You're blocking me. But according to you, the railroad can't take advantage of the rise in any case. According to you, you can sell for $20, but we can only get 2.5. Who made it worth 20? Cried Annixter. I have improved it up to that figure. Genslinger seems to have that idea in his nut, too. Do you people think you can hold that land untaxed for speculative purposes until it goes up to $30 and then sell out to someone else? Sell it over our heads? You and Genslinger weren't in office when those contracts were drawn. You ask your boss. You ask S. Behrman. He knows. The general office is pledged to sell to us in preference to anyone else for 2.5. Well, observed Ruggles decidedly, tapping the end of his pencil on his desk and leaning forward to emphasize his words, we're not selling now. That's said and signed, Mr. Annixter. Why not? Come, spit it out. What's the bunco game this time? Because we're not ready. Here's your check. You won't take it? No. I'll make it a cash payment, money down, the whole of it, payable to Cyrus Blakely Ruggles for the P&SW. No. Third and last time. No. Oh, go to the devil. I don't like your tone, Mr. Annixter, returned Ruggles, flushing angrily. I don't give a curse whether you like it or not, retorted Annixter, rising and thrusting the check into his pocket. But never you mind, Mr. Ruggles. You and S. Behrman and Genslinger and Shelgram and the whole gang of thieves of you, you'll wake this state of California up some of these days by going just one little bit too far. And there'll be an election of railroad commissioners of, by, and for the people that'll get a twist of you, my bunco-steering friend, you and your backers and cappers and swindlers and thimble-riggers, and smash you, lock, stock, and barrel. That's my tip to you, and be damned to you, Mr. Cyrus Blackleg Ruggles. Annixter stormed out of the room, slamming the door behind him, and Ruggles, trembling with anger, turned to his desk and to the blotting pad written all over with the words lands, $20, 2.5, option, and over again, with great swelling curves and flourishes, railroad, railroad, railroad. But as Annixter passed into the outside office, on the other side of the wire partition, he noted the figure of a man at the counter in conversation with one of the clerks. There was something familiar to Annixter's eye about the man's heavy-built frame, his great shoulders and massive back, and as he spoke to the clerk in a tremendous, rumbling voice, Annixter promptly recognized Dyke. There was a meeting. Annixter liked Dyke, as did everyone else in and about Bonneville. He paused now to shake hands with the discharged engineer and to ask about his little daughter, Sidney, to whom he knew Dyke was devotedly attached. "Smartest little tad in Tulare County," asserted Dyke. "She's getting prettier every day, Mr. Annixter. There's a little tad that was just born to be a lady. Can recite the whole of Snowbound without ever stopping. You don't believe that, maybe, eh? Well, it's true. She'll be just old enough to enter the seminary up at Marysville next winter, and if my hop business pays 2% on the investment, there's where she's going to go." "How's it coming on?" inquired Annixter. "The hop ranch? Prime. I've about got the land in shape, and I've engaged a foreman who knows all about hops. I've been in luck. Everybody will go into the business next year when they see hops go to $1, and they'll overstock the market and bust the price. But I'm going to get the cream of it now. I say 2%. Why, Lord love you, it will pay a good deal more than that. It's got to. It's cost more than I figured to start the thing, so perhaps I may have to borrow somewheres. But then on such a sure game as this, and I do want to make something out of that little tad of mine." "Through here?" inquired Annixter, making ready to move off. "In just a minute," answered Dyke. "Wait for me, and I'll walk down the street with you." Annixter grumbled that he was in a hurry, but waited nevertheless, while Dyke again approached the clerk. "I shall want some empty cars of you people this fall," he explained. "I'm a hop raiser now, and I just want to make sure what your rates on hops are. I've been told, but I want to make sure. Savvy?" There was a long delay while the clerk consulted the tariff schedules, and Annixter fretted impatiently. Dyke, growing uneasy, leaned heavily on his elbows, watching the clerk anxiously. If the tariff was exorbitant, he saw his plans brought to naught, his money jeopardized, the little tad, Sidney, deprived of her education. He began to blame himself that he had not long before determined definitely what the railroad would charge for moving his hops. He told himself he was not much of a businessman, that he managed carelessly. 2 cents, suddenly announced the clerk with a certain surly indifference. 2 cents a pound? Yes, 2 cents a pound. That's in carload lots, of course. I won't give you that rate on smaller consignments. Yes, carload lots, of course. 2 cents. Well, all right. He turned away with a great sigh of relief. "He sure did have me scared for a minute," he said to Annixter as the two went down the street, fiddling and fussing so long. 2 cents is all right, though. Seems fair to me. That fiddling of his was all put on. I know 'em, these railroad heelers. He knew I was a discharged employee first off, and he played the game just to make me seem small because I had to ask favors of him. I don't suppose the general office tips its slaveys off to act like swine, but there's the feeling through the whole herd of them. You got to come to us. We let you live only so long as we choose, and what are you going to do about it? If you don't like it, get out." Annixter and the engineer descended to the street and had a drink at the Yosemite bar, and Annixter went into the general store, while Dyke bought a little pair of red slippers for Sidney. Before the salesman had wrapped them up, Dyke slipped a dime into the toe of each with a wink at Annixter. "Let the little tad find 'em there," he said behind his hand in a hoarse whisper. "That'll be one on Sid." "Where to now?" demanded Annixter as they regained the street. "I'm going down to the post office and then pull out for the ranch. Going my way?" Dyke hesitated in some confusion, tugging at the ends of his fine blond beard. No, I guess I'll leave you here. I've got other things to do up the street. So long." The two separated, and Annixter hurried through the crowd to the post office, but the mail that had come in on that morning's train was unusually heavy. It was nearly half an hour before it was distributed. Naturally enough, Annixter placed all the blame of the delay upon the railroad, and delivered himself of some pointed remarks in the midst of the waiting crowd. He was irritated to the last degree when he finally emerged upon the sidewalk again, cramming his mail into his pockets. One cause of his bad temper was the fact that in the bundle of Quien-Sabe letters was one to Hilma Tree in a man's handwriting. Annixter had growled to himself. "That Pip Delaney. Seems now that I'm to act as go-between for him. Well, maybe that female girl gets this letter, and then again maybe she don't." But suddenly his attention was diverted. Directly opposite the post office, upon the corner of the street, stood quite the best business building of which Bonneville could boast. It was built of Colusa granite, very solid, ornate, imposing. Upon the heavy plate of the window of its main floor, in gold and red letters, one read the words, "Loan and Savings Bank of Tulare County." It was of this bank that S. Behrman was president. At the street entrance of the building was a curved sign of polished brass, fixed upon the angle of the masonry. This sign bore the name S. Behrman, and under it in smaller letters were the words, "Real Estate, Mortgages." As Annixter's glance fell upon this building, he was surprised to see Dyke standing upon the curb in front of it, apparently reading from a newspaper that he held in his hand. But Annixter promptly discovered that he was not reading at all. From time to time the former engineer shot a swift glance out of the corner of his eye up and down the street. Annixter jumped at a conclusion. An idea suddenly occurred to him. Dyke was watching to see if he was observed, was waiting an opportunity when no one who knew him should be in sight. Annixter stepped back a little, getting a telegraph pole somewhat between him and the other. Very interested, he watched what was going on. Pretty soon Dyke thrust the paper into his pocket and sauntered slowly to the windows of a stationery store, next the street entrance of S. Behrman's office. For a few seconds he stood there, his back turned, seemingly absorbed in the display, but eyeing the street narrowly nevertheless. Then he turned around, gave a last look about, and stepped swiftly into the doorway by the great brass sign. He disappeared. Annixter came from behind the telegraph pole with a flush of actual shame upon his face. There had been something so slinking, so mean, in the movements and manner of this great, burly, honest fellow of an engineer that he could not help but feel ashamed for him. Circumstances were such that a simple business transaction was to Dyke almost culpable, a degradation, a thing to be concealed. "Borrowing money of S. Behrman," commented Annixter, "mortgaging your little homestead to the railroad, putting your neck in the halter. Poor fool! The pity of it! Good Lord, your hops must pay you big now, old man." Annixter lunched at the Yosemite Hotel, and then, later on, toward the middle of the afternoon, rode out of the town at a canter by the way of the upper road that paralleled the railroad tracks and that ran diametrically straight between Bonneville and Guadalajara. About halfway between the two places he overtook Father Soria, trudging back to San Juan, his long cassock powdered with dust. He had a wicker crate in one hand, and in the other, in a small square valise, the materials for the Holy Sacrament. Since early morning the priest had covered nearly 15 miles on foot in order to administer extreme unction to a moribund good-for-nothing, a greaser, half Indian, half Portuguese, who lived in a remote corner of Osterman's stock range at the head of a canyon there. But he had returned by way of Bonneville to get a crate that had come for him from San Diego. He had been notified of its arrival the day before. Annixter pulled up and passed the time of day with the priest. "I don't often get up your way," he said, slowing down his horse to accommodate Soria's deliberate plodding. Soria wiped the perspiration from his smooth, shiny face. "You? Well, with you it is different," he answered. "But there are a great many Catholics in the county, some on your ranch, and so few come to the mission. At High Mass on Sundays there are a few, Mexicans and Spaniards from Guadalajara mostly, but weekdays, for matins, vespers, and the like, I often say the offices to an empty church, the voice of one crying in the wilderness. You Americans are not good churchmen. Sundays you sleep, you read the newspapers." "Well, there's Vanamy," observed Annixter. "I suppose he's there early and late." Soria made a sharp movement of interest. "Ah, Vanamy, a strange lad. A wonderful character for all that. If there were only more like him. I am troubled about him. You know, I am a very owl at night. I come and go about the mission at all hours. Within the week 3 times I have seen Vanamy in the little garden by the mission, and at the dead of night. He had come without asking for me. He did not see me. It was strange. Once, when I had got up at dawn to ring for early matins, I saw him stealing away out of the garden. He must have been there all the night. He is acting queerly. He is pale. His cheeks are more sunken than ever. There is something wrong with him. I can't make it out. It is a mystery. Suppose you ask him." "Not I. I've enough to bother myself about. Vanamy is crazy in the head. Some morning he will turn up missing again and drop out of sight for another 3 years. Best let him alone, Soria. He's a crank. How is that greaser of yours up on Osterman's stock range?" "Ah, the poor fellow, returned the other, the tears coming to his eyes. "He died this morning, as you might say, in my arms, painfully, but in the faith. A good fellow." "A lazy, cattle-stealing, knife-in-his-boot dago." "You misjudge him. A really good fellow, on better acquaintance." Annixter grunted scornfully. Soria's kindness and goodwill toward the most outrageous reprobates of the ranches were proverbial. He practically supported some 6 families that lived in forgotten cabins, lost and all but inaccessible, in the far corners of stock range and canyon. This particular greaser was the laziest, the dirtiest, the most worthless of the lot. But in Saria's mind the lout was an object of affection, sincere, unquestioning. Thrice a week the priest, with a basket of provisions, cold ham, a bottle of wine, olives, loaves of bread, even a chicken or two, toiled over the interminable stretch of country between the mission and his cabin. Of late, during the rascal's sickness, these visits had been almost daily. Hardly once did the priest leave the bedside that he did not slip a $50 into the palm of his wife or oldest daughter. And this was but one case out of many. His kindliness toward animals was the same. A horde of mange-corroded curs lived off his bounty, wolfish, ungrateful, often marking him with their teeth, yet never knowing the meaning of a harsh word. A burro, overfed, lazy, incorrigible, browsed on the hill back of the mission, obstinately refusing to be harnessed to Saria's little cart, squealing and biting whenever the attempt was made. And the priest suffered him, submitting to his humor, inventing excuses for him, alleging that the burro was foundered, or was in need of shoes, or was feeble from extreme age. The two peacocks, magnificent, proud, cold-hearted, resenting all familiarity, he served with the timorous, apologetic affection of a queen's lady-in-waiting, resigned to their disdain, happy if only they condescended to enjoy the grain he spread for them. At the Long Trestle, Annixter and the priest left the road and took the trail that crossed Broderson Creek by the clumps of gray-green willows and led across Quien to the ranch house and to the mission farther on. They were obliged to proceed in single file here, and Annixter, who had allowed the priest to go in front, promptly took notice of the wicker basket he carried. Upon his inquiry, Saria became confused. It was a basket that he had had sent down to him from the city. "Well, I know, but what's in it?" "Why, I'm sure, poultry, a chicken or two." "Fancy breed?" Yes, that's it, a fancy breed." At the ranch house, where they arrived toward 5 o'clock, Annixter insisted that the priest should stop long enough for a glass of sherry. Saria left the basket and his small black valise at the foot of the porch steps, and sat down in a rocker on the porch itself, fanning himself with his broad-brimmed hat and shaking the dust from his cassock. Annixter brought out the decanter of sherry and glasses, and the two drank to each other's health. But as the priest set down his glass, wiping his lips with a murmur of satisfaction, the decrepit Irish setter that had attached himself to Annixter's house came out from underneath the porch and nosed vigorously about the wicker basket. He upset it. The little peg holding down the cover slipped. The basket fell sideways, opening as it fell, and a cock, his head enclosed in a little chamois bag such as are used for gold watches, struggled blindly out into the open air. A second, similarly hooded, followed. The pair, stupefied in their headgear, stood rigid and bewildered in their tracks, clucking uneasily. Their tails were closely sheared. Their legs, thickly muscled and extraordinarily long, were furnished with enormous, cruel-looking spurs. The breed was unmistakable. Annixter looked once at the pair, then shouted with laughter. "Poultry, a chicken or two, fancy breed. Oh, yes, I should think so. Gamecocks, fighting cocks. Oh, you old rat, you'll be a dry nurse to a burro and keep a hospital for infirm puppies, but you will fight gamecocks. Oh, Lord! Why, Saria, this is as good a grind as I ever heard. There's the Spanish cropping out after all." Speechless with chagrin, the priest bundled the cocks into the basket, and catching up the valise, took himself abruptly away, almost running till he had put himself out of hearing of Annixter's raillery. And even 10 minutes later, when Annixter, still chuckling, stood upon the porch steps, he saw the priest, far in the distance, climbing the slope of the high ground in the direction of the mission, still hurrying on at a great pace, his cassock flapping behind him, his head bent. To Annixter's notion, the very picture of discomfiture and confusion. As Annixter turned about to re-enter the house, he found himself almost face to face with Hilma Tree. She was just going in at the doorway, and a great flame of the sunset, shooting in under the eaves of the porch, enveloped her from her head with its thick moist hair that hung low over her neck to her slim feet, setting a golden flash in the little steel buckles of her low shoes. She had come to set the table for Annixter's supper. Taken all aback by the suddenness of the encounter, Annixter ejaculated an abrupt and senseless, "Excuse me." But Hilma, without raising her eyes, passed on unmoved into the dining-room, leaving Annixter trying to find his breath and fumbling with the brim of his hat that he was surprised to find he had taken from his head. Resolutely, and taking a quick advantage of his opportunity, he followed her into the dining-room. "I see that dog has turned up," he announced with brisk cheerfulness, "that Irish setter I was asking about." Hilma, a swift pink flush deepening the delicate rose of her cheeks, did not reply except by nodding her head. She flung the tablecloth out from under her arms across the table, spreading it smooth with quick little caresses of her hands. There was a moment's silence. Then Annixter said, "Here's a letter for you." He laid it down on the table near her, and Hilma picked it up. "And see here, Miss Hilma," Annixter continued, "about this morning, I suppose you think I am a first-class mucker. If it will do any good to apologize, why, I will. I want to be friends with you. I made a bad mistake and started in the wrong way. I don't know much about women people. I want you to forget about that this morning and not think I am a galoot and a mucker. Will you do it? Will you be friends with me?" Hilma set the plate and coffee cup by Annixter's place before answering, and Annixter repeated his question. Then she drew a deep, quick breath, the flush in her cheeks returning. "I think it was so wrong of you," she murmured. "Oh, you don't know how it hurt me. I cried, for an hour." "Well, that's just it," returned Annixter vaguely, moving his head uneasily. "I didn't know what kind of a girl you were. I made a mistake. I thought it didn't make much difference. I thought all females were about alike." "I hope you know now," murmured Hilma ruefully. "I've paid enough to have you find out. I cried. You don't know. Why, it hurt me worse than anything I can remember. I hope you know now." "Well, I do know now," he exclaimed. "It wasn't so much that you tried to do what you did," answered Hilma, the single deep swell from her waist to her throat rising and falling in her emotion. "It was that you thought that you could, that anybody could that wanted to, that I held myself so cheap. Oh," she cried with a sudden sobbing catch in her throat, "I can never forget it, and you don't know what it means to a girl." "Well, that's just what I do want," he repeated. "I want you to forget it and have us be good friends." In his embarrassment, Annixter could think of no other words. He kept reiterating again and again during the pauses of the conversation, "I want you to forget it. Will you? Will you forget it, this morning, and have us be good friends?" He could see that her trouble was keen. He was astonished that the matter should be so grave in her estimation. After all, what was it that a girl should be kissed? But he wanted to regain his lost ground. "Will you forget it, Miss Hilma? I want you to like me." She took a clean napkin from the sideboard drawer and laid it down by the plate. I do want you to like me," persisted Annixter. "I want you to forget all about this business and like me." Hilma was silent. Annixter saw the tears in her eyes. "How about that? Will you forget it? Will you like me?" She shook her head. "No," she said. "No what? You won't like me? Is that it?" Hilma, blinking at the napkin through her tears, nodded to say yes, that was it. Annixter hesitated a moment, frowning, harassed and perplexed. "You don't like me at all, hey?" At length Hilma found her speech. In her low voice, lower and more velvety than ever, she said, "No, I don't like you at all." Then, as the tears suddenly overpowered her, she dashed a hand across her eyes and ran from the room and out of doors. Annixter stood for a moment thoughtful, his protruding lower lip thrust out, his hands in his pockets. "I suppose she'll quit now," he muttered. "Suppose she'll leave the ranch, if she hates me like that. Well, she can go, that's all, she can go. Fool female girl," he muttered between his teeth. "Petticoat mess." He was about to sit down to his supper when his eye fell upon the Irish setter, on his haunches in the doorway. There was an expectant, ingratiating look on the dog's face. No doubt he suspected it was time for eating. "Get out, you!" roared Annixter in a tempest of wrath. The dog slunk back, his tail shut down close, his ears drooping, but instead of running away, he lay down and rolled supinely upon his back, the very image of submission, tame, abject, disgusting. It was the one thing to drive Annixter to a fury. He kicked the dog off the porch in a rolling explosion of oaths, and flung himself down to his seat before the table, fuming and panting. "Damn the dog and the girl and the whole rotten business! And now," he exclaimed, as a sudden fancied qualm arose in his stomach, "now it's all made me sick. Might have known it. Oh, it only lacked that to wind up the whole day. Let her go. I don't care, and the sooner the better." He countermanded the supper and went to bed before it was dark, lighting his lamp on the chair near the head of the bed, and opening his Copperfield at the place marked by the strip of paper torn from the bag of prunes. For upward of an hour he read the novel, methodically swallowing one prune every time he reached the bottom of a page. About 9 o'clock he blew out the lamp, and, punching up his pillow, settled himself for the night. Then, as his mind relaxed in that strange, hypnotic condition that comes just before sleep, a series of pictures of the day's doings passed before his imagination like the roll of a kinetoscope. First it was Hilma Tree, as he had seen her in the dairy house. Charming, delicious, radiant of youth, her thick white neck with its pale amber shadows under the chin, her wide-open eyes rimmed with fine black lashes, the deep swell of her breast and hips, the delicate, lustrous floss on her cheek, impalpable as the pollen of a flower. He saw her standing there in the scintillating light of the morning, her smooth arms wet with milk, redolent and fragrant of milk, her whole desirable figure moving in the golden glory of the sun, steeped in a lambent flame, saturated with it, glowing with it, joyous as the dawn itself. Then it was Los Muertos and Hooven, the sordid little Dutchman, grimed with the soil he worked in, yet vividly remembering a period of military glory, exciting himself with recollections of Gravelotte and the Kaiser, but contented now in the country of his adoption, defining the fatherland as the place where wife and children lived. Then came the ranch house of Los Muertos, under the grove of cypress and eucalyptus, with its smooth gravel driveway and well-groomed lawns. Mrs. Derrick, with her wide-opened eyes that so easily took on a look of uneasiness, of innocence, of anxious inquiry, her face still pretty, her brown hair that still retained so much of its brightness spread over her chair-back, drying in the sun. Magnus, erect as an officer of cavalry, smooth-shaven, gray, thin-lipped, imposing, with his hawk-like nose and forward-curling gray hair. Presley, with his dark face, delicate mouth, and sensitive, loose lips, in corduroys and laced boots, smoking cigarettes, an interesting figure suggestive of a mixed origin, morbid, excitable, melancholy, brooding upon things that had no names. Then it was Bonneville, with the gaiety and confusion of Main Street, the whirring electric cars, the zinc-sheathed telegraph poles, the buckboards with squashes stowed under the seats. Ruggles in frock coat, Stetson hat, and shoestring necktie, writing abstractedly upon his blotting pad. Dyke, the engineer, big-boned, powerful, deep-voiced, good-natured, with his fine blond beard and massive arms, rehearsing the praises of his little daughter Sidney, guided only by the one ambition that she should be educated at a seminary, slipping a dime into the toe of her diminutive slipper, then, later, overwhelmed with shame, slinking into S. Behrman's office to mortgage his homestead to a healer of the corporation that had discharged him. By suggestion, Annixter saw S. Behrman, too, fat, with a vast stomach, the cheek and neck meeting to form a great tremulous jowl, the roll of fat over his collar sprinkled with sparse, stiff hairs. Saw his brown, round-topped hat of varnished straw, the linen vest stamped with innumerable interlocked horseshoes, the heavy watch-chain clinking against the pearl vest buttons. Invariably placid, unruffled, never losing his temper, serene, unassailable, enthroned. Then, at the end of all, it was the ranch again, seen in a last brief glance before he had gone to bed. The fecundated earth, calm at last, nursing the implanted germ of life, ruddy with the sunset, the horizon's purple, the small clamor of the day lapsing into quiet, the great still twilight building itself, dome-like, toward the zenith. The barn fowls were roosting in the trees near the stable, the horses crunching their fodder in the stalls, the day's work ceasing by slow degrees. And the priest, the Spanish churchman, Father Soria, relic of a departed regime, kindly, benign, believing in all goodness, a lover of his fellows and of dumb animals, yet for all that hurrying away in confusion and discomfiture, carrying in one hand the vessels of the Holy Communion and in the other a basket of gamecocks. Chapter 6. It was high noon, and the rays of the sun, that hung poised directly overhead in an intolerable white glory, fell straight as plummets upon the roofs and streets of Guadalajara. The adobe walls and sparse brick sidewalks of the drowsing town radiated the heat in an oily, quivering shimmer. The leaves of the eucalyptus trees around the plaza drooped motionless, limp and relaxed under the scorching, searching blaze. The shadows of these trees had shrunk to their smallest circumference, contracting close about the trunks. The shade had dwindled to the breadth of a mere line. The sun was everywhere. The heat, exhaling from brick and plaster and metal, met the heat that steadily descended blanket-wise and smothering from the pale, scorched sky. Only the lizards, they lived in chinks of the crumbling adobes and in interstices of the sidewalk, remained without, motionless as if stuffed, their eyes closed to mere slits, basking, stupefied with heat. At long intervals the prolonged drone of an insect developed out of the silence, vibrated a moment in a soothing, somnolent long note, then trailed slowly into the quiet again. Somewhere in the interior of one of the adobe houses a guitar snored and hummed sleepily. On the roof of the hotel a group of pigeons cooed incessantly, with subdued, liquid murmurs, very plaintive. A cat, perfectly white, with a pink nose and thin pink lips, dozed complacently on a fence rail, full in the sun. In a corner of the plaza 3 hens wallowed in the baking hot dust, their wings fluttering, clucking comfortably. And this was all. A Sunday repose prevailed over the moribund town, peaceful, profound. A certain pleasing numbness, a sense of grateful enervation exhaled from the scorching plaster. There was no movement, no sound of human business. The faint hum of the insect, the intermittent murmur of the guitar, the mellow complainings of the pigeons, the prolonged purr of the white cat, the contented clucking of the hens, all these noises mingled together to form a faint, drowsy bourdon, prolonged, stupefying, suggestive of an infinite quiet, of a calm, complacent life, centuries old, lapsing gradually to its end under the gorgeous loneliness of a cloudless pale blue sky and the steady fire of an interminable sun. In Solitari's Spanish-Mexican restaurant, Vanamee and Presley sat opposite each other at one of the tables near the door, a bottle of white wine, tortillas, and an earthen pot of frijoles between them. They were the sole occupants of the place. It was the day that Annixter had chosen for his barn dance, and, in consequence, Quien-Sabe was en fete and work suspended. Presley and Vanamee had arranged to spend the day in each other's company, lunching at Solitari's and taking a long tramp in the afternoon. For the moment they sat back in their chairs, their meal all but finished. Solitari brought black coffee and a small carafe of mescal, and, retiring to a corner of the room, went to sleep. All through the meal Presley had been wondering over a certain change he observed in his friend. He looked at him again. Vanamee's lean, spare face was of an olive pallor. His long black hair, such as one sees in the saints and evangelists of the pre-Raphaelite artists, hung over his ears. Presley again remarked his pointed beard, black and fine, growing from the hollow cheeks. He looked at his face, a face like that of a young seer, like a half-inspired shepherd of the Hebraic legends, a dweller in the wilderness, gifted with strange powers. He was dressed as when Presley had first met him, herding his sheep, in brown canvas overalls thrust into top boots, gray flannel shirt, open at the throat, showing the breast ruddy with tan, the waist encircled with a cartridge belt, empty of cartridges. But now, as Presley took more careful note of him, he was surprised to observe a certain new look in Vanamy's deep-set eyes. He remembered now that all through the morning Vanamy had been singularly reserved. He was continually drifting into reveries, abstracted, distrait. Indubitably, something of moment had happened. At length Vanamy spoke. Leaning back in his chair, his thumbs in his belt, his bearded chin upon his breast, his voice was the even monotone of one speaking in his sleep. He told Presley in a few words what had happened during the first night he had spent in the garden of the old mission, of the answer, half-fancied, half-real, that had come to him. "To no other person but you would I speak of this," he said. "But you, I think, will understand, will be sympathetic, at least, and I feel the need of unburdening myself of it to someone. At first I would not trust my own senses. I was sure I had deceived myself, but on a second night it happened again. Then I was afraid, or no, not afraid, but disturbed, shaken to my very heart's core. I resolved to go no further in the matter, never again to put it to test. For a long time I stayed away from the mission, occupying myself with my work, keeping it out of my mind. But the temptation was too strong. One night I found myself there again, under the black shadow of the pear trees, calling for Angele, summoning her from out the dark, from out the night. This time the answer was prompt, unmistakable. I cannot explain to you what it was, nor how it came to me, for there was no sound. I saw absolutely nothing but the empty night. There was no moon, but somewhere off there, over the little valley, far off, the darkness was troubled. That me that went out upon my thought, out from the mission garden, out over the valley, calling for her, searching for her, found, I don't know what, but found a resting place, a companion. 3 times since then I have gone to the mission garden at night. Last night was the 3rd time. He paused, his eyes shining with excitement. Presley leaned forward toward him, motionless with intense absorption. "Well, and last night?" he prompted. Vanamy stirred in his seat. His glance fell. He drummed an instant upon the table. "Last night," he answered, there was a change. The answer was," he drew a deep breath, "nearer." "You are sure?" The other smiled with absolute certainty. "It was not that I found the answer sooner, easier. I could not be mistaken. No, that which has troubled the darkness, that which has entered into the empty night, is coming nearer to me. Physically nearer, actually nearer." His voice sank again. His face, like the face of younger prophets, the seers, took on a half-inspired expression. He looked vaguely before him, with unseeing eyes. "Suppose," he murmured, "suppose I stand there under the pear trees at night and call her again and again, and each time the answer comes nearer and nearer, and I wait until at last one night, the supreme night of all, she... Suddenly the tension broke. With a sharp cry and a violent, uncertain gesture of the hand, Vanamy came to himself. "Oh," he exclaimed, "what is it? Do I dare? What does it mean? There are times when it appalls me, and there are times when it thrills me with a sweetness and a happiness that I have not known since she died. The vagueness of it, how can I explain it to you, this that happens when I call to her across the night? That faint, far-off, unseen tremble in the darkness, that intangible, scarcely perceptible stir. Something neither heard nor seen, appealing to a sixth sense only. Listen, it is something like this. On Kiansabe, all last week, we have been seeding the earth. The grain is there now under the earth, buried in the dark, in the black stillness, under the clods. Can you imagine the very first little quiver of life that the grain of wheat must feel after it is sown, when it answers to the call of the sun down there in the dark of the earth, blind, deaf? The very first stir from the inert, long, long before any physical change has occurred, long before the microscope could discover the slightest change, when the shell first tightens with the first faint premonition of life. Well, it is something as elusive as that." He paused again, dreaming, lost in a reverie. Then, just above a whisper, murmured, "That which thou sowest is not quickened except it die." And she, Angele, died. He paused again, dreaming, lost in a reverie. Then, just above a whisper, murmured, "That which thou sowest is not quickened except it die." And she, Annalee, died. "You could not have been mistaken," said Presley. "You were sure that there was something. Imagination can do so much, and the influence of the surroundings was strong. How impossible it would be that anything should happen. And you say you heard nothing, saw nothing?" "I believe," answered Vanamee, "in a sixth sense, or rather a whole system of other unnamed senses beyond the reach of our understanding. People who live much alone and close to nature experience the sensation of it. Perhaps it is something fundamental that we share with plants and animals. The same thing that sends the birds south long before the first colds, the same thing that makes the grain of wheat struggle up to meet the sun. And this sense never deceives. You may see wrong, hear wrong, but once touch this sixth sense, and it acts with absolute fidelity, you are certain. No, I hear nothing in the mission garden. I see nothing. Nothing touches me. But I am certain for all that." Presley hesitated for a moment, then he asked, "Shall you go back to the garden again, make the test again?" "I don't know." "Strange enough," commented Presley, wondering. Vanamee sank back in his chair, his eyes growing vacant again. "Strange enough," he murmured. There was a long silence. Neither spoke nor moved. There in that moribund ancient town, wrapped in its siesta, flagellated with heat, deserted, ignored, baking in a noonday silence, these two strange men, the one a poet by nature, the other by training, both out of tune with their world. Dreamers, introspective, morbid, lost and unfamiliar at that end-of-the-century time, searching for a sign, groping and baffled amidst the perplexing obscurity of the delusion, sat over empty wine-glasses, silent with the pervading silence that surrounded them, hearing only the cooing of doves and the drone of bees, the quiet so profound that at length they could plainly distinguish at intervals the puffing and coughing of a locomotive switching cars in the station-yard of Bonneville. It was, no doubt, this jarring sound that at length roused Presley from his lethargy. The two friends rose. Solotari very sleepily came forward. They paid for the luncheon, and stepping out into the heat and glare of the streets of the town, passed on through it and took the road that led northward across a corner of Dyke's hop fields. They were bound for the hills in the northeastern corner of Quien-Sabe. It was the same walk which Presley had taken on the previous occasion when he had first met Vanamee herding the sheep. This encompassing detour around the whole countryside was a favorite pastime of his, and he was anxious that Vanamee should share his pleasure in it. But soon after leaving Guadalajara, they found themselves upon the land that Dyke had bought, and upon which he was to raise his famous crop of hops. Dyke's house was close at hand, a very pleasant little cottage, painted white, with green blinds and deep porches, while near it, and yet in process of construction, were two great storehouses, and a drying and curing house, where the hops were to be stored and treated. All about were evidences that the former engineer had already been hard at work. The ground had been put in readiness to receive the crop, and a bewildering, innumerable multitude of poles, connected with a maze of wire and twine, had been set out. Farther on, at a turn of the road, they came upon Dyke himself, driving a farm wagon loaded with more poles. He was in his shirt-sleeves, his massive, hairy arms, bare to the elbow, glistening with sweat, red with heat. In his bell-like, rumbling voice, he was calling to his foreman and a boy at work in stringing the poles together. At the sight of Presley and Vanamee, he hailed them jovially, addressing them as boys, and insisting that they should get into the wagon with him and drive to the house for a glass of beer. His mother had only the day before returned from Marysville, where she had been looking up a seminary for the little Tad. She would be delighted to see the two boys. Besides, Vanamee must see how the little Tad had grown since he last set eyes on her. Wouldn't know her for the same little girl. And the beer had been on ice since morning. Presley and Vanamee could not well refuse. They climbed into the wagon and jolted over the uneven ground, through the bare forest of hop poles to the house. Inside they found Mrs. Dyke, an old lady with a very gentle face, who wore a cap and a very old-fashioned gown with hoop skirts, dusting the what-not in a corner of the parlor. The two men were presented, and the beer was had from off the ice. "Mother," said Dyke, as he wiped the froth from his great blond beard, "ain't Sid anywheres about? I want Mr. Vanamy to see how she has grown. Smartest little tad in Tulare County, boys, and recites the whole of Snowbound end to end without skipping or looking at the book. Maybe you don't believe that. Mother, ain't I right? Without skipping a line, eh?" Mrs. Dyke nodded to say that it was so, but explained that Sidney was in Guadalajara. In putting on her new slippers for the first time the morning before, she had found a dime in the toe of one of them, and had had the whole house by the ears ever since till she could spend it. "Was it for licorice, to make her licorice water?" inquired Dyke gravely. "Yes," said Mrs. Dyke. "I made her tell me what she was going to get before she went, and it was licorice." Dyke, though his mother protested that he was foolish and that Presley and Vanamy had no great interest in young ones, insisted upon showing the visitors Sidney's copybooks. They were monuments of laborious, elaborate neatness, the trite moralities and ready-made aphorisms of the philanthropists and publicists repeated from page to page with wearying insistence. "I, too, am an American citizen, S.D. As the twig is bent, the tree is inclined. Truth, crushed to earth, will rise again. As for me, give me liberty or give me death." And last of all, a strange intrusion amongst the mild, well-worn phrases, two legends. "My motto, public control of public franchises," and "The P&SW is an enemy of the state." "I see," commented Presley, "you mean the little tad to understand the situation early." "I told him he was foolish to give that to Sid to copy," said Mrs. Dyke, with indulgent remonstrance. "What can she understand of public franchises?" "Never mind," observed Dyke. "She'll remember it when she grows up, and when the seminary people have rubbed her up a bit, and then she'll begin to ask questions and understand. And don't you make any mistake, Mother," he went on, "about the little tad not knowing who her dad's enemies are. What do you think, boys? Listen here. Precious little I've ever told her of the railroad or how I was turned off. But the other day I was working down by the fence next the railroad tracks, and Sid was there. She'd brought her doll rags down, and she was playing house behind a pile of hop poles. Well, along comes a through freight, mixed train from Missouri points and a string of empties from New Orleans, and when it had passed, what do you suppose the tad did? She didn't know I was watching her. She goes to the fence and spits a little spit after the caboose, and puts out her little head and, if you'll believe me, hisses at the train. And Mother says she does that same every time she sees a train go by, and never crosses the tracks that she don't spit her little spit on 'em. What do you think of that?" "But I correct her every time," protested Mrs. Dyke seriously. "Where she picked up the trick of hissing, I don't know. No, it's not funny. It seems dreadful to see a little girl who's as sweet and gentle as can be in every other way so venomous. She says the other little girls at school, and the boys too, are all the same way. Oh dear," she sighed, "why will the general office be so unkind and unjust? Why, I couldn't be happy with all the money in the world if I thought that even one little child hated me so that it would spit and hiss at me. And it's not one child, it's all of them, so Sidney says. And think of all the grown people who hate the road, women and men, the whole county, the whole state, thousands and thousands of people. Don't the managers and the directors of the road ever think of that? Don't they ever think of all the hate that surrounds them, everywhere, and the good people that just grit their teeth when the name of the road is mentioned? Why do they want to make the people hate them?" "No," she murmured, the tears starting to her eyes. "No, I tell you, Mr. Presley, the men who own the railroad are wicked, bad-hearted men who don't care how much the poor people suffer, so long as the road makes its $18 million a year. They don't care whether the people hate them or love them, just so long as they are afraid of them. It's not right, and God will punish them sooner or later." A little after this, the two young men took themselves away, Dyke obligingly carrying them in the wagon as far as the gate that opened onto the Quien-Sabe ranch. On the way, Presley referred to what Mrs. Dyke had said, and led Dyke himself to speak of the P&SW. "Well," Dyke said, "it's like this, Mr. Presley. I personally haven't got the right to kick. With you wheat-growing people, I guess it's different. But hops, you see, don't count for much in the state. It's such a little business that the road don't want to bother themselves to tax it. It's the wheat growers that the road cinches. The rates on hops are fair. I've got to admit that. I was into Bonneville a while ago to find out. It's 2 cents a pound, and, Lord love you, that's reasonable enough to suit any man. No, he concluded, I'm on the way to make money now. The road sacking me as they did was, maybe, a good thing for me after all. It came just at the right time. I had a bit of money put by, and here was the chance to go into hops with the certainty that hops would quadruple and quintuple in price inside the year. No, it was my chance, and though they didn't mean it by a long chalk, the railroad people did me a good turn when they gave me my time. And the tad'll enter the seminary next fall. About a quarter of an hour after they had said good-bye to the one-time engineer, Presley and Vanamee, tramping briskly along the road that led northward through Kiansabe, arrived at Annixter's ranch house. At once they were aware of a vast and unwonted bustle that revolved about the place. They stopped a few moments looking on, amused and interested in what was going forward. The colossal barn was finished. Its freshly whitewashed sides glared intolerably in the sun, but its interior was as yet innocent of paint, and through the yawning vent of the sliding doors came a delicious odor of new, fresh wood and shavings. A crowd of men, Annixter's farm hands, were swarming all about it. Some were balanced on the topmost rounds of ladders, hanging festoons of Japanese lanterns from tree to tree, and all across the front of the barn itself. Mrs. Tree, her daughter Hilma, and another woman were inside the barn, cutting into long strips bolt after bolt of red, white, and blue cambric, and directing how these strips should be draped from the ceiling and on the walls. Everywhere resounded the tapping of tack hammers. A farm wagon drove up loaded to overflowing with evergreens and with great bundles of palm leaves, and these were immediately seized upon and affixed as supplementary decorations to the tricolored cambric upon the inside walls of the barn. 2 of the larger evergreen trees were placed on either side of the barn door, and their tops bent over to form an arch. In the middle of this arch it was proposed to hang a mammoth pasteboard escutcheon with gold letters spelling the word "Welcome." Piles of chairs, rented from IOOF Hall in Bonneville, heaped themselves in an apparently hopeless entanglement on the ground, while at the far extremity of the barn a couple of carpenters clattered about the impromptu staging which was to accommodate the band. There was a strenuous gaiety in the air. Everybody was in the best of spirits. Notes of laughter continually interrupted the conversation on every hand. At every moment a group of men involved themselves in uproarious horseplay. They passed oblique jokes behind their hands to each other, grossly veiled double meanings meant for the women, and bellowed with laughter thereat, stamping on the ground. The relations between the sexes grew more intimate, the women and girls pushing the young fellows away from their sides with vigorous thrusts of their elbows. It was passed from group to group that Adela Vaca, a division superintendent's wife, had lost her garter. The daughter of the foreman of the home ranch was kissed behind the door of the dairy house. Annixter, in execrable temper, appeared from time to time, hatless, his stiff yellow hair in wild disorder. He hurried between the barn and the ranch house, carrying now a wicker demijohn, now a case of wine, now a basket of lemons and pineapples. Besides general supervision, he had elected to assume the responsibility of composing the punch, something stiff, by jingo, a punch that would raise you right out of your boots, a regular hair-lifter. The harness room of the barn he had set apart for himself and intimates. He had brought a long table down from the house, and upon it had set out boxes of cigars, bottles of whiskey and of beer, and the great china bowls for the punch. It would be no fault of his, he declared, if half the number of his men friends were not uproarious before they left. His barn dance would be the talk of all Tulare County for years to come. For this one day he had resolved to put all thoughts of business out of his head. For the matter of that, things were going well enough. Osterman was back from Los Angeles with a favorable report as to his affair with Disbrow and Darrell. There had been another meeting of the committee. Aaron Derrick had attended. Though he had taken no part in the discussion, Annixter was satisfied. The governor had consented to allow Harron to come in if he so desired, and Harron had pledged himself to share 1/6 of the campaign expenses, providing these did not exceed a certain figure. As Annixter came to the door of the barn to shout abuse at the distraught Chinese cook who was cutting up lemons in the kitchen, he caught sight of Presley and Vanamee and hailed them. "Hello, Press," he called. "Come over here and see how she looks." He indicated the barn with a movement of his head. "Well, we're getting ready for you tonight," he went on as the two friends came up. "But how we are going to get straightened out by 8 o'clock, I don't know. Would you believe that Pip Caraher is short of lemons at this last minute, and I told him I'd want 3 cases of 'em as much as a month ago. And here, just when I want a good lively saddle horse to get around on, somebody hikes the buckskin out of the corral. Stole her, by jingo. I'll have the law on that thief if it breaks me. And a $60 saddle and headstall gone with her. And only about half the number of Jap lanterns that I ordered have shown up, and not candles enough for those. It's enough to make a dog sick. There's nothing done that you don't do yourself unless you stand over these loafers with a club. I'm sick of the whole business, and I've lost my hat. Wish to God I'd never dreamed of giving this rotten fool dance. Clutter the whole place up with a lot of females. I sure did lose my presence of mind when I got that idea." Then, ignoring the fact that it was he himself who had called the young men to him, he added, "Well, this is my busy day. Sorry I can't stop and talk to you longer." He shouted a last imprecation at the Chinaman and turned back into the barn. Presley and Vanamee went on, but Annixter, as he crossed the floor of the barn, all but collided with Hilma Tree, who came out from one of the stalls, a box of candles in her arms. Gasping out an apology, Annixter re-entered the harness room, closing the door behind him, and, forgetting all the responsibility of the moment, lit a cigar and sat down in one of the hired chairs, his hands in his pockets, his feet on the table, frowning thoughtfully through the blue smoke. Annixter was at last driven to confess to himself that he could not get the thought of Hilma Tree out of his mind. Finally she had got a hold on him. The thing that of all others he most dreaded had happened. A female girl had got a hold on him, and now there was no longer for him any such thing as peace of mind. The idea of the young woman was with him continually. He went to bed with it. He got up with it. At every moment of the day he was pestered with it. It interfered with his work, got mixed up in his business. What a miserable confession for a man to make. A fine way to waste his time. Was it possible that only the other day he had stood in front of the music store in Bonneville and seriously considered making Hilma a present of a music box? Even now the very thought of it made him flush with shame. And this after she had told him plainly that she did not like him. He was running after her, he, Annixter. He ripped out a furious oath, striking the table with his boot heel. Again and again he had resolved to put the whole affair from out his mind. Once he had been able to do so, but of late it was becoming harder and harder with every successive day. He had only to close his eyes to see her as plain as if she stood before him. He saw her in the glory of sunlight that set a fine tinted luster of pale carnation and gold on the silken sheen of her white skin. Her hair sparkled with it. Her thick, strong neck, sloping to her shoulders with beautiful full curves, seemed to radiate the light. Her eyes, brown, wide, innocent in expression, disclosing the full disk of the pupil upon the slightest provocation, flashed in this sunlight like diamonds. Annixter was all bewildered. With the exception of the timid little creature in the glove-cleaning establishment in Sacramento, he had had no acquaintance with any woman. His world was harsh, crude, a world of men only, men who were to be combated, opposed. His hand was against nearly every one of them. Women he distrusted with the instinctive distrust of the overgrown schoolboy. Now, at length, a young woman had come into his life. Promptly he was struck with discomfiture, annoyed almost beyond endurance, harassed, bedeviled, excited, made angry, and exasperated. He was suspicious of the woman, yet desired her, totally ignorant of how to approach her, hating the sex, yet drawn to the individual, confusing the two emotions, sometimes even hating Hilma as a result of this confusion, but at all times disturbed, vexed, irritated beyond power of expression. At length Annixter cast his cigar from him and plunged again into the work of the day. The afternoon wore to evening, to the accompaniment of wearying and clamorous endeavor. In some unexplained fashion, the labor of putting the great barn in readiness for the dance was accomplished. The last bolt of cambric was hung in place from the rafters. The last evergreen tree was nailed to the joists of the walls. The last lantern hung, the last nail driven into the musicians' platform. The sun set. There was a great scurry to have supper and dress. Annixter, last of all the other workers, left the barn in the dusk of twilight. He was alone. He had a saw under one arm, a bag of tools was in his hand. He was in his shirt-sleeves and carried his coat over his shoulder. A hammer was thrust into one of his hip pockets. He was in execrable temper. The day's work had fagged him out. He had not been able to find his hat. "And the buckskin with $60 worth of saddle gone, too," he groaned. "Oh, ain't it sweet!" At his house, Mrs. Tree had set out a cold supper for him, the inevitable dish of prunes serving as dessert. After supper, Annixter bathed and dressed. He decided at the last moment to wear his usual town-going suit, a sack suit of black made by a Bonneville tailor. But his hat was gone. There were other hats he might have worn, but because this particular one was lost, he fretted about it all through his dressing, and then decided to have one more look around the barn for it. For over a quarter of an hour he pottered about the barn, going from stall to stall, rummaging the harness room and feed room, all to no purpose. At last he came out again upon the main floor, definitely giving up the search, looking about him to see if everything was in order. The festoons of Japanese lanterns in and around the barn were not yet lighted, but some half-dozen lamps with great tin reflectors that hung against the walls were burning low. A dull half-light pervaded the vast interior, hollow, echoing, leaving the corners and roof thick with impenetrable black shadows. The barn faced the west, and through the open sliding doors was streaming a single bright bar from the afterglow, incongruous and out of all harmony with the dull flare of the kerosene lamps. As Annixter glanced about him, he saw a figure step briskly out of the shadows of one corner of the building, pause for the fraction of one instant in the bar of light, then, at the sight of him, dart back again. There was a sound of hurried footsteps. Annixter, with recollections of the stolen buckskin in his mind, cried out sharply, "Who's there?" There was no answer. In a second his pistol was in his hand. "Who's there? Quick, speak up, or I'll shoot." "No, don't shoot," cried an answering voice. "Oh, be careful. It's I, Hilma Tree." Annixter slid the pistol into his pocket with a great qualm of apprehension. He came forward and met Hilma in the doorway. "Good Lord," he murmured, "that sure did give me a start. If I had shot—" Hilma stood abashed and confused before him. She was dressed in a white organdy frock of the most rigorous simplicity, and wore neither flower nor ornament. The severity of her dress made her look even larger than usual, and even as it was her eyes were on a level with Annixter's. There was a certain fascination in the contradiction of stature and character of Hilma. A great girl, half child as yet, but tall as a man for all that. There was a moment's awkward silence. Then Hilma explained, I came back to look for my hat. I thought I left it here this afternoon." "And I was looking for my hat," cried Annixter. "Funny enough, eh?" They laughed at this as heartily as children might have done. The constraint of the situation was a little relaxed, and Annixter, with sudden directness, glanced sharply at the young woman and demanded, "Well, Miss Hilma, hate me as much as ever?" "Oh, no, sir," she answered. "I never said I hated you." "Well, dislike me, then. I know you said that." I disliked what you did, tried to do. It made me angry, and it hurt me. I shouldn't have said what I did that time, but it was your fault." "You mean you shouldn't have said you didn't like me?" asked Annixter. "Why?" Well, I don't dislike anybody," admitted Hilma. "Then I can take it that you don't dislike me? Is that it?" "I don't dislike anybody," persisted Hilma. "Well, I asked you more than that, didn't I?" queried Annixter uneasily. "I asked you to like me, remember, the other day? I'm asking you that again now. I want you to like me." Hilma lifted her eyes inquiringly to his. In her words was an unmistakable ring of absolute sincerity. Innocently she inquired, "Why?" Annixter was struck speechless. In the face of such candor, such perfect ingenuousness, he was at a loss for any words. Well, he stammered. "Well, I don't know," he suddenly burst out. "That is," he went on, groping for his wits, "I can't quite say why." The idea of a colossal lie occurred to him, a thing actually royal. "I like to have the people who are around me like me," he declared. I like to be popular, understand? Yes, that's it," he continued, more reassured. "I don't like the idea of anyone disliking me. That's the way I am. It's my nature." "Oh, then," returned Hilma, "you needn't bother. No, I don't dislike you." "Well, that's good," declared Annixter judicially. "That's good. But hold on," he interrupted. "I'm forgetting. It's not enough to not dislike me. I want you to like me. How about that?" Hilma paused for a moment, glancing vaguely out of the doorway toward the lighted window of the dairy house, her head tilted. "I don't know that I ever thought about that," she said. "Well, think about it now," insisted Annixter. "But I never thought about liking anybody particularly," she observed. "It's because I like everybody, don't you see?" "Well, you've got to like some people more than other people," hazarded Annixter, "and I want to be one of those some people, savvy? Good Lord, I don't know how to say these fool things. I talk like a galoot when I get talking to female girls, and I can't lay my tongue to anything that sounds right. It isn't my nature. And look here, I lied when I said I like to have people like me, to be popular. Rot! I don't care a curse about people's opinions of me. But there's a few people that are more to me than most others. That chap Presley, for instance, and those people I do want to have like me. What they think counts. Sure, I know I've got enemies, piles of them. I could name you half a dozen men right now that are naturally itching to take a shot at me. How about this ranch? Don't I know? Can't I hear the men growling oaths under their breath after I've gone by? And in business ways, too," he went on, speaking half to himself. "In Bonneville and all over the county there's not a man of them wouldn't howl for joy if they got a chance to down Buck Annixter. Think I care? Why, I like it. I run my ranch to suit myself, and I play my game my own way. I'm a driver, I know it, and a bully, too. Oh, I know what they call me, a brute beast with a twist in my temper that would rile up a newborn lamb, and I'm crusty and pig-headed and obstinate. They say all that, but they've got to say, too, that I'm cleverer than any man jack in the running. There's nobody can get ahead of me." His eyes snapped. "Let 'em grind their teeth. They can't down me. When I shut my fist, there's not one of them can open it. No, not with a chisel." He turned to Hilma again. "Well, when a man's hated as much as that, it stands to reason, don't it, Miss Hilma, that the few friends he has got he wants to keep? I'm not such an entire swine to the people that know me best. That jackass Presley, for instance. I'd put my hand in the fire to do him a real service. Sometimes I get kind of lonesome. Wonder if you would understand. It's my fault, but there's not a horse about the place that don't lay his ears back when I get on him. There's not a dog don't put his tail between his legs as soon as I come near him. The cayuse isn't foaled yet here on Quien-Sabe that can throw me, nor the dog whelp that would dare show his teeth at me. I kick that Irish setter every time I see him. But wonder what I'd do, though, if he didn't slink so much, if he wagged his tail and was glad to see me. So it all comes to this. I'd like to have you, well, sort of feel that I was a good friend of yours and like me because of it." The flame in the lamp on the wall in front of Hilma stretched upward, tall and thin, and began to smoke. She went over to where the lamp hung, and, standing on tiptoe, lowered the wick. As she reached her hand up, Annixter noted how the somber, lurid red of the lamp made a warm reflection on her smooth, round arm. "Do you understand?" he queried. "Yes, why, yes," she answered, turning around. It's very good of you to want to be a friend of mine. I didn't think so, though, when you tried to kiss me. But maybe it's all right since you've explained things. You see, I'm different from you. I like everybody to like me, and I like to like everybody. It makes one so much happier. You wouldn't believe it, but you ought to try it, sir, just to see. It's so good to be good to people and to have people good to you. And everybody has always been so good to me. Mama and Papa, of course, and Billy the stableman, and Montalegre the Portuguese foreman, and the Chinese cook, even, and Mr. Delaney, only he went away, and Mrs. Vaca and her little... Delaney, eh? Demanded Annixter abruptly. You and he were pretty good friends, were you? Oh, yes, she answered. He was just as good to me. Every day in the summertime he used to ride over to the seed ranch back of the mission and bring me a great armful of flowers, the prettiest things, and I used to pretend to pay him for them with dollars made of cheese that I cut out of the cheese with a biscuit cutter. It was such fun. We were the best of friends. There's another lamp smoking, growled Annixter. Turn it down, will you, and see that somebody sweeps this floor here. It's all littered up with pine needles. I've got a lot to do. Goodbye. Goodbye, sir. Annixter returned to the ranch house, his teeth clenched, enraged, his face flushed. Ah, he muttered, Delaney, hey? Throwing it up to me that I fired him. His teeth gripped together more fiercely than ever. The best of friends, eh? By God, I'll have that girl yet. I'll show that cowpuncher. Ain't I her employer, her boss? I'll show her, and Delaney, too. It would be easy enough, and then Delaney can have her, if he wants her, after me. An evil light flashing from under his scowl spread over his face. The male instincts of possession, unreasoned, treacherous, oblique, came twisting to the surface. All the lower nature of the man, ignorant of women, racked at one and the same time with enmity and desire, roused itself like a hideous and abominable beast. And at the same moment Hilma returned to her house, humming to herself as she walked, her white dress glowing with a shimmer of faint saffron light in the last ray of the afterglow. A little after 7:30, the first carryall, bearing the druggist of Bonneville and his womenfolk, arrived in front of the new barn. Immediately afterward, an express wagon loaded down with a swarming family of Spanish Mexicans, gorgeous in red and yellow colors, followed. Billy, the stableman, and his assistant took charge of the teams, unchecking the horses and hitching them to a fence back of the barn. Then Caraher, the saloon-keeper, in derby hat, Prince Albert coat, pointed yellow shoes, and inevitable red necktie, drove into the yard on his buckboard, the delayed box of lemons under the seat. It looked as if the whole array of invited guests was to arrive in one unbroken procession, but for a long half-hour nobody else appeared. Annixter and Caraher withdrew to the harness-room and promptly involved themselves in a wrangle as to the make-up of the famous punch. From time to time their voices could be heard, uplifted in clamorous argument. 2 quarts and a half, and a cupful of chartreuse. Rot, rot, I know better. Champagne straight and a dash of brandy. The druggist's wife and sister retired to the feed-room, where a bureau with a swinging mirror had been placed for the convenience of the women. The druggist stood awkwardly outside the door of the feed-room, his coat-collar turned up against the drafts that drifted through the barn, his face troubled, debating anxiously as to the propriety of putting on his gloves. The Spanish-Mexican family, a father, mother, and 5 children and sister-in-law, sat rigid on the edges of the hired chairs, silent, constrained, their eyes lowered, their elbows in at their sides, glancing furtively from under their eyebrows at the decorations, or watching with intense absorption young Vaca, son of one of the division superintendents, who wore a checked coat and white thread gloves, and who paced up and down the length of the barn, frowning, very important, whittling a wax candle over the floor to make it slippery for dancing. The musicians arrived, the city band of Bonneville, Annixter having managed to offend the leader of the Dirigo Club Orchestra at the very last moment, to such a point that he had refused his services. These members of the city band repaired at once to their platform in the corner. At every instant they laughed uproariously among themselves, joshing one of their number, a Frenchman whom they called Skeezicks. Their hilarity reverberated in a hollow, metallic roll among the rafters overhead. The druggist observed to young Vaca as he passed by that he thought them pretty fresh, just the same. "I'm busy, I'm very busy," returned the young man, continuing on his way, still frowning and paring the stump of candle. 2 quarts and a half, 2 quarts and a half. Ah, yes, in a way that's so, and then again, in a way it isn't. I know better. All along one side of the barn were a row of stalls, 14 of them, clean as yet, redolent of new-cut wood, the sawdust still in the cracks of the flooring. Deliberately the druggist went from one to the other, pausing contemplatively before each. He returned down the line, and again took up his position by the door of the feed-room, nodding his head judicially, as if satisfied. He decided to put on his gloves. By now it was quite dark. Outside, between the barn and the ranch houses, one could see a group of men on step-ladders lighting the festoons of Japanese lanterns. In the darkness only their faces appeared here and there, high above the ground, seen in a haze of red, strange, grotesque. Gradually, as the multitude of lanterns were lit, the light spread. The grass underfoot looked like green excelsior. Another group of men invaded the barn itself, lighting the lamps and lanterns there. Soon the whole place was gleaming with points of light. Young Vaca, who had disappeared, returned with his pockets full of wax candles. He resumed his whittling, refusing to answer any questions, vociferating that he was busy. Outside there was a sound of hoofs and voices. More guests had arrived. The druggist, seized with confusion, terrified lest he had put on his gloves too soon, thrust his hands into his pockets. It was Cutter, Magnus Derrick's division superintendent, who came, bringing his wife and her 2 girl cousins. They had come 15 miles by the trail from the far-distant division house on 4 of Los Muertos, and had ridden on horseback instead of driving. Mrs. Cutter could be heard declaring that she was nearly dead, and felt more like going to bed than dancing. The 2 girl cousins, in dresses of dotted Swiss over blue sateen, were doing their utmost to pacify her. She could be heard protesting from moment to moment. One distinguished the phrases, "straight to my bed," "back nearly broken in 2, "never wanted to come in the first place." The druggist, observing Cutter take a pair of gloves from Mrs. Cutter's reticule, drew his hands from his pockets. But abruptly there was an interruption. In the musicians' corner a scuffle broke out. A chair was overturned. There was a noise of imprecations mingled with shouts of derision. Skeezicks, the Frenchman, had turned upon the joshers. "Ah, no," he was heard to exclaim. "At the end of the end is too much. Kind of a bad canary. We will go to see about that. Aha! Let him close up his face before I demolish it with a good stroke of the fist." The men who were lighting the lanterns were obliged to intervene before he could be placated. Hooven and his wife and daughters arrived. Minna was carrying little Hilda, already asleep, in her arms. Minna looked very pretty, striking even, with her black hair, pale face, very red lips, and greenish-blue eyes. She was dressed in what had been Mrs. Hooven's wedding gown, a cheap affair of farmer's satin. Mrs. Hooven had pendant earrings of imitation jet in her ears. Hooven was wearing an old frock coat of Magnus Derrick's, the sleeves too long, the shoulders absurdly too wide. He and Cutter at once entered into an excited conversation as to the ownership of a certain steer. "Why, the brand—" "Ach Gott, der Brand!" Hooven clasped his head. "Ach, der Brand! Doc makes me laugh some laughs. That's gut, der Brand. Don't I see him? Sure, der Bull mit der black star by der forehead in der Mittelhof. Any someones you ask tell you dat is mine Bull. You ask any someones. Der Brand, to hell mit der Brand. You ain't got some memories about dis thing, I guess not." "Please step aside, gentlemen," said young Vaca, who was still making the rounds of the floor. Hooven whirled about. "Eh, what den?" he exclaimed, still excited, willing to be angry at anyone for the moment. "Don't you push so, you. I think perhaps you don't own those barn here." "I'm busy. I'm very busy." The young man pushed by with grave preoccupation. 2 quarts and a half. 2 quarts and a half. "I know better. That's all rot." But the barn was filling up rapidly. At every moment there was a rattle of a newly arrived vehicle from outside. Guest after guest appeared in the doorway, singly or in couples, or in families, or in garrulous parties of 5 and 6. Now it was Phelps and his mother from Los Muertos. Now a foreman from Broderson's with his family. Now a gaily apparelled clerk from a Bonneville store, solitary and bewildered, looking for a place to put his hat. Now a couple of Spanish-Mexican girls from Guadalajara, with coquettish effects of black and yellow about their dress. Now a group of Osterman's tenants, Portuguese, swarthy, with plastered hair and curled mustaches, redolent of cheap perfumes. Soria arrived, his smooth, shiny face glistening with perspiration. He wore a new cassock and carried his broad-brimmed hat under his arm. His appearance made quite a stir. He passed from group to group, urbane, affable, shaking hands right and left. He assumed a set smile of amiability which never left his face the whole evening. But abruptly there was a veritable sensation. From out the little crowd that persistently huddled about the doorway came Osterman. He wore a dress suit with a white waistcoat and patent leather pumps. What a wonder! A little calm of excitement spread around the barn. One exchanged nudges of the elbow with one's neighbor, whispering earnestly behind the hand. What astonishing clothes! Catch on to the coat-tails. It was a masquerade costume, maybe. That goat Osterman was such a josher, one could never tell what he would do next. The musicians began to tune up. From their corner came a medley of mellow sounds, the subdued chirps of the violins, the dull bourdon of the bass viol, the liquid gurgling of the flageolet, and the deep-toned snarl of the big horn, with now and then a rasping stridulating of the snare-drum. A sense of gaiety began to spread throughout the assembly. At every moment the crowd increased. The aroma of new-sawn timber and sawdust began to be mingled with the feminine odor of sachet and flowers. There was a babble of talk in the air, male baritone and soprano chatter, varied by an occasional note of laughter and the swish of stiffly starched petticoats. On the row of chairs that went around 3 sides of the wall, groups began to settle themselves. For a long time the guests huddled close to the doorway. The lower end of the floor was crowded, the upper end deserted. But by degrees the lines of white muslin and pink and blue sateen extended, dotted with the darker figures of men in black suits. The conversation grew louder as the timidity of the early moments wore off. Groups at a distance called back and forth. Conversations were carried on at top voice. Once even a whole party hurried across the floor from one side of the barn to the other. Annixter emerged from the harness room, his face red with wrangling. He took a position to the right of the door, shaking hands with newcomers, inviting them over and over again to cut loose and whoop it along. Into the ears of his more intimate male acquaintances he dropped a word as to punch and cigars in the harness room later on, winking with vast intelligence. Ranchers from remoter parts of the country appeared. Garnett from the Ruby Rancho, Keast from the ranch of the same name, Gethings of the San Pablo, Chattern of the Bonanza, and others, and still others, a score of them, elderly men for the most part, bearded, slow of speech, deliberate, dressed in broadcloth. Old Broderson, who entered with his wife on his arm, fell in with this type, and with them came a certain Dabney, of whom nothing but his name was known, a silent old man who made no friends, whom nobody knew or spoke to, who was seen only upon such occasions as this, coming from no one knew where, going no one cared to inquire whither. Between 8 and half-past, Magnus Derrick and his family were seen. Magnus' entry caused no little impression. Some said, "There's the governor," and called their companions' attention to the thin, erect figure, commanding, imposing, dominating all in his immediate neighborhood. Aaron came with him, wearing a cutaway suit of black. He was undeniably handsome, young and fresh-looking, his cheeks highly colored, quite the finest-looking of all the younger men. Blond, strong, with that certain courtliness of manner that had always made him liked. He took his mother upon his arm and conducted her to a seat by the side of Mrs. Broderson. Annie Derrick was very pretty that evening. She was dressed in a gray silk gown with a collar of pink velvet,